get some. All right, so we're going to try this again after a reboot. So let's see.
Are you live when you're doing that?
I am. All right. So as I said, you're going to see that this is in three distinct parts. Part of it was before my surgery, part was after, and it's obvious which is which. So I didn't quite know how to handle this because, as I said a little bit earlier, this is a struggle that's been going on for 10,000 years. But people today don't understand that. So the first part of the lesson this morning of how did this all begin is actually going to be a more modernist view based on the information that the history books would tell us. Okay. So really how it began is actually a very difficult question. It's not just a matter of good guys, bad guys, because the problem is that there's good guys and bad guys on both sides of the conflict. So you got to take off the old Western idea of white hat, black hat, okay? Because that's not going to work for us here. So we need to look at it in terms of timeline, okay? What happened in different times. So the current map of Israel, this is the familiar shape with this border that is between Egypt and Israel. And then the Jordan River is the border between the country of Jordan and Israel. And then on the north side, we've got Syria with a little country in between. And then at the very north, we've got Lebanon. Now, today, there's certain regions of this area that keep on making news. We keep on seeing it pop up because of unrest. They don't even call it what it really is, but unrest. So we see the Golan Heights. We don't see that pop up very often, but that's something that you'll hear in passing, the Golan Heights. Then we've got the West Bank, which actually is referring to the west bank of the Jordan River. Okay. And then we've got the Gaza Strip, which is right there in the west corner of Israel. And so it's that's the little top and then a line down to the bottom. Yes. So if you look, yeah, it is tiny. So if you start up here, in Golan, then you'll see that there's some different lakes. So this is Lake Tiberias, also called Sea of Galilee. What? Yeah. But they don't call it that anymore. Okay. The Romans renamed it, named after Tiberius Caesar. Right. Okay. So Lake Tiberias there, and then going down the Jordan River to the Dead Sea, and then down the Dead Sea, following the Jordan River all the way to the Gulf of Aqaba.
So that is all water.
That's all water.
From there to there.
Yep. Okay. Then this border right here, the border between Israel and Egypt. Okay. That border has been pretty solid. It hasn't changed much in several thousand years.
It's not water.
That's not water. They call it the Wadi of Egypt.
Okay.
So it is an intermittent stream. Okay.
So, yeah.
It's all right.
I know you're getting ready to throw the history out, but did this not start from this?
It did.
Okay, Ishmael.
Calm down, Gene, just wait.
I was so excited I pretended I knew and I ran ahead.
All right. So creation of Israel, 1948. So in 1947, the United Kingdom, who actually controlled this region of the world after World War One. In World War One, the Ottoman Empire was no more. And the area that was controlled by the Ottoman Empire was actually divvied up between the French and the Great Britain and the British Empire. Okay. Now, If you look at movies like Casablanca, there's this huge French influence in Arabia. And what's the deal with that? That's why. After World War I, the French Foreign Legion controlled that area that used to be the Turks. Okay, it was the Ottoman Empire. And the other part was controlled by Great Britain, which they had a humongous empire all across the world because of their strong navy from the 1700s. But in 1947, the UK requested that some of that territory in the Middle East be handled by the General Assembly of the United Nations. So basically, hey, we've created this new thing called the United Nations. Let's give them something to be in charge of. And so the UK said, well, how about this area that used to be part of the Ottoman Empire? We really can't control that, so let's just give it to them. All right. So by the beginning of 1948, the United Nations Special Committee proposed this area be broken up as an independent Arab state, an independent Jewish state, and an international trustee-run city of Jerusalem. So it was at this point that Jerusalem got split up into different areas. There is a Muslim quarter and a Christian quarter and a Jewish quarter and an international quarter. Okay, so Jerusalem got split up these ways. And these new independent states looked like this. So the yellow area was the part that was given by the United Nations as a country for Arabs. The orange part is the country for Jews. And then that little bitty white eyeball that's in the middle there was Jerusalem. Okay.
So why did they do it that way? I mean, why is there orange everywhere?
They did it based on the demographics of the people that were already there. Okay. So there was already a lot of Arabs that were in this area because the Ottoman Empire were Arabs. Okay. So that's what all that started with. So this is actually the country that was established by the United Nations. Notice what it was called. Palestine. This country is called Palestine. But within Palestine, there is an Arab state, which means Arab government, and there's a Jewish state, which means Jewish government. So it has nothing to do with religion. It has to do with demographics. Okay. The same thing happened in Ireland, which is why there is, and it's a line now, but it's because of wars that there's a line. But it has nothing to do with these are Protestant religious people and these are Catholic religious people. It has to do with who they're going to pay taxes to. If they're Catholic religious people, they pay their taxes to Rome. If they're Protestant religious people, then they pay their taxes to England. Okay, so it just had to do with taxes, not religion. But it was still kind of tied together because of who was in charge of each of those places. So this country is actually called Palestine. Now, there is a scripture, Isaiah 66:8. It says, who has ever heard of such things? Who has ever seen things like this? Can a country be born in a day, or a nation be brought forth in a moment? Yet no sooner is Zion in labor than she gives birth to her children. So this prophecy is saying that who has heard of this wacky thing? But I'm telling you, it's going to happen because when the Jews get together, they're going to form a country in a day. And guess what? In 1968, it happened. In one day, the United Nations says, Israel, there's your country. And that country was established in one day. Now, the Jewish people saw this establishment of a homeland as fulfillment of this scripture. So for them all along, this has been a religious thing. Now, the problem is the rest of the world doesn't see it as such. Okay? The Arab Palestinians who were already living here saw this as an imperialist land grab. So remember, this is the empire of Great Britain. So they were saying, hey, the British don't want any Jews there, so they're just creating a Jewish place so they kick out all of the Jews and send them here. That's the propaganda that was going on. And they swore revenge against the Zionists. Zion, where do we get that word from? We get that from scripture, okay? Zion is the new Jewish homeland. We see it in Revelation, but we also see it in Daniel, Ezekiel, and Isaiah. We see it as part of prophecy. So Zionists are those who desired a homeland for the Jewish people. Now, this immediately sparked a civil war within the confines of the Israeli-Palestinian region. So no one's satisfied with what they were given.
So that was the 60s.
48.
1948.
Yeah, 1948. So a civil war resulted in the Palestinian areas designated by the UN to be lost to Israel. By the end of this very quick war, Palestine was gone, and Israel alone remained. The world saw this as an atrocity because the Israelis, they had an unfair advantage because of where their country was carved out, and the Palestinians had an unfair advantage because all they had was rocks. Okay? The rest of the world said, Israel, you're wrong for doing this, but President Harry Truman formally recognized this new country of Israel. And then Joseph Stalin also formally recognized this new country of Israel. Now, who are they in relation to the rest of the world? The two biggest powers. And they already established during World War II, if you mess with us, we will kill you. Okay? So the rest of the world didn't step up to this land grab by the Israelites. So the black border that you see there, that still looks like the shape that we have today, but notice what's missing. No West Bank, no Gaza Strip, no Golan Heights. Okay, it is all one country, Israel. Now, the neighboring Arab countries together, referred to as the Arab League, brought their armed forces against Israel. So now we've got Syria, a country called Transjordan, Iraq, Saudi Arabia, and Egypt. And they all gather their forces and invade Israel. Initially, Israel loses 40% of their land. But Russia then sends World War II surplus arms and ammunition from Eastern Europe. So all of the World War II surplus that was still in Poland, all of the stands that we have today, okay, Uzbekistan and all the stands, and he puts those on ships and just sends it all the way over to Israel. Israel takes that armament and quickly regains their territory, plus some. Israel, in a shrewd legal maneuver, signed 2 truces, basically ceasefires of several months each. And during that time, they built their army that was second to none. But in exchange, they did give up the Sinai Peninsula back to Egypt because they had completely taken it. And the area between Jerusalem and the Jordan River to the country of Jordan. So now they couldn't call themselves Transjordan anymore because that meant both sides of the Jordan.
Yeah.
So they gave it back. And so now we've got this area that now outlines this familiar shape of Israel with this little piece cut out in the southwest corner and this big piece that's cut out on the east side, okay, in the yellow. Now, as a result of the ending of the war, the Arab countries expelled all the Jewish people had been living there in those countries. So any Jew that was in Egypt, you're out of here. Some of these families have been there for 2,000 years.
Wow.
And basically, if you're Jewish, you're out. You want a homeland so bad, go live there. And they expelled any Jew from Syria, Jordan, Lebanon, Egypt, Iraq, Iran. And it started a mass migration from all across the world.
So they could be Iranian and Jewish, but they still had to go live in.
Because they were descended from Jews. They could no longer live there. In turn, Israel expelled all the Arab people from Israel. This resulted in continuing skirmishes between the Jewish and the Arab peoples all around the world. On May 26, 1967, the Egyptian president announced to the world, just unprompted, the battle will be a general one and our basic objective will be to destroy Israel. Why would you come out in the news and say such a thing? On June 5th, 1967, Israel, tired of the pushback from Arab countries, declared war simultaneously against Egypt, Jordan, and Syria. By June 11th, 6 days later, Israel pushed the oppressing armies back on 3 fronts, taking over Sinai, which had belonged to Egypt, and the West Bank, which had belonged to Syria, and the Golan Heights, or that should be Jordan, and the Golan Heights, which is Syria. So now they've made their country look like a big old J. Okay, it's completely different than what it looks like today. After the war, many skirmishes continued on the Egyptian front. France and Germany said, you know what? We've had this agreement since World War II. We're not going to supply you any more arms. Even though we promised to, we're done. The United States said, well, we'll take up your contracts. And so the US starts sending United States-made weapons, bullets, special forces, trainers into Israel. Fighting continues, but no battle resulted in any exchange of lands. Jews moved into the Palestinian areas of Gaza and the West Bank, and then a ceasefire was called in 1973 because it had become what they call a war of attrition.
Right.
Nothing's gained or lost. People are just dying on both sides. Okay, so the ceasefire was called in 1973, but the Arab countries decided to open up a new front, an economic front. The price of oil was immediately raised overnight from $1.80 per barrel to $11.65 per barrel overnight. And production was cut by 5%. And overnight, this resulted in worldwide shortages. Yeah.
On the edge of my memory.
So if you had a license plate that was even, you could get gas on this day, but you're limited to 10 gallons. If you have an odd, you can go on this day, but again, you're limited to 10 gallons. Oh yeah, they were the huge gas guzzlers. And it's because of this that all of a sudden the American market for automobiles crashed. This was the beginning of the decline for Detroit because they were producing American muscle. That's what they were good at. And all of a sudden, Yugoslavian cars, Japanese cars, Yugos, okay, Korean cars, those were more popular because they were so lightweight and economical. Okay, so really the Arabs molded the economy of the world all because of this oil embargo of 1973. And this was a direct result of them not being able to beat the Israelites for land. Okay? A little piece of land. So due to international pressure, Israel says, fine. They give the Sinai Peninsula back to Egypt, and they give most of Golan back to Syria. And in 1980, Israel declares Jerusalem to be its capital. Well, they're the only ones that agree. The rest of the world says, no, your capital's in Tel Aviv, and that's where it's going to remain. And it stayed that way until 2020. And who decided that it was going to be Jerusalem? The Orange Man, President Trump. Yeah. President Trump said, no, they declared it was going to be Jerusalem. So I declare it's Jerusalem. The US closed their embassy in Tel Aviv and opened up an embassy in Jerusalem. And after that, anybody dealing with the US in the region had to go to Jerusalem. And so Trump basically forced everyone else's hand, and Jerusalem is the capital. The reason why is because you're going to say something. The reason why is because remember, Jerusalem was set up to be an independent area of Jerusalem. Like DC, it was supposed to be independent, not run by either party. In this case, not run by either country, the Arab state or the Israeli state. Satan knows what he's doing, and he made Jerusalem the holiest place in the world, not only for Jews, not only for Christians, but Muslims as well. And it is like the second most holy spot in the Islam religion. The first being Mecca, because that's where Muhammad's from, or buried, or whatever. But Israel has Jerusalem, which was meant to stay independent, but it's not anymore. Now, the UN doesn't agree with this declaration of Jerusalem being the capital. The Palestinians in the West Bank, that's the darker purple area here, fear that Israel has too much power over them, and they start to rebel.
This is the 80s?
This is the 80s.
Okay.
Now, the reason they rebel is because the Jewish held areas in the West Bank have all of the grain, all of the crops, all of the water, all of the fertile soil.
Yeah.
But remember, not the whole purple area is Israel. Okay, remember, the Israelites just kind of migrated into the West Bank, but the areas that they took control of were the best. They're the richest because they have Western relatives that sent them money for the cause. They're the richest, and they still do, absolutely. They're the richest because they've got all of the military support from the Western world. And so they took over all the water supplies, and they just gave the Palestinians just enough to survive, hoping that they'd get the hint and move away. But they're stubborn, and they wouldn't move away, okay? And so what happened is the Palestinians that lived in this area finally had enough, and they rose up. Another civil war. Excuse me. So during the struggles between Palestine and Israel, starting in the 1960s, a government group of Palestinian sympathizers organized the Palestinian Liberation Organization, led by Yasser Arafat. Okay. Now, those of us older than Jacob know this name. Okay. And we know this guy. Okay. Yasser Arafat was in the news, and he always had that red and white checkered rag on his head. Okay. So every day. So the Palestinian Liberation Organization, the PLO. Now, the PLO is a government group. It's a government group. It is not a militant group. They were doing everything through government channels. It was all about watching the money, controlling trade. Everything was trying to force Israel to give the Palestinian land back to the sole control of the Palestinians. In 1987, a group splintered off of the PLO, stating that the PLO was not religious enough. The PLO, you've lost your sight. This is supposed to be for Muhammad. It's supposed to be for Allah. It's not supposed to be for money or land. This group called themselves the Islamic Resistance Movement. In Arabic, the initials spell Hamas. Okay, So Hamas is not a country. Hamas isn't even a people group. It is a religious movement that splintered off of the Palestinian Liberation Organization. Okay. So, and because of their guerrilla approach, they are terrorists. Their whole goal is to create enough fear that they win whatever goal that they've set their target on. Okay. In 1988, the PLO declared the Palestinian territories, even those held by Israel, to be a nation called Palestine. The move was accepted by 136 countries worldwide because that's the way that the United Nations originally set it out.
So why did it take so long?
Well, they just came forward, and now we don't have the big bad United States and the big bad Russia working together against the rest of the world. Well, now the US and the Russians are against each other. Hey, they're so busy fighting each other that we can say, yeah, we agree with the UN. Okay, so that's what's going on there. The US, the Great Britain, Australia, Mexico, Canada, India, and Japan, they refuse to agree. And they say, you can say that it's a country of Palestine, but it's not. We still support Israel. Okay. The reason that US says that they support Israel is because the Bible says so. And the Bible Belt America will crucify any president that does not support Israel. All right. So that's biblically motivated. The rest of the world, it's because of the assets that they're getting from Israel. Israel has their special forces for hire. And if you belong to Great Britain, Australia, Mexico, Canada, India, and Japan, you can get them for a bargain price. So they have assets that they can purchase on the cheap from Israel. That's why they support Israel. Okay, so it's not religious for them.
Yeah, we talked about how good their special forces
Oh yeah, they're the best in the world.
are. Every high school graduate.
Every male has a 3-year contract in the military. Every female has a 2-year contract. And it's mandatory for everybody. Which is why if you try to take over a country, that's kind of dumb, because every single person you're going to come across, they can fight. And the stories, y'all have seen the stories that came out. We've got old men that grabbed their service weapons and they went out in the streets and defended the children.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's,
Yeah.
yeah. Yep. Yeah, I got to keep my uniform. That was it. Yeah. So, because of this in 1988, this now in the eyes of the world stages Israel as being the oppressor and Palestine as being the country that is oppressed and being invaded. Okay, so let's move into very modern history. Since 2000, Israel as a country has pretty much left the Gaza Strip and the West Bank alone in relative peace. Small gangs of Hamas continually raided Jewish settlements. That's kibbutz. If you ever hear the word kibbutz on the news, basically it's Jewish communes that's built to be self-contained neighborhoods. And so they move into an area of the desert and then they develop water sources and crops, and they live as just a little commune. It's called a kibbutz. A lot of my Jewish friends, when they graduated high school, they went to Israel and they spent some time helping out in a kibbutz. I was raised in a Jewish community, so I'm very familiar with the feelings of animosity between the two different groups. Now, Israel just suppressed these uprisings with the police action. They just sent a small police squad in there, and the policemen would settle the unrest. No, it didn't. It didn't. It was exactly. Yeah. Now, every once in a while, Hamas would send a rocket into Israel, and then Israel would respond in kind. And it may or may not make the news because it was something that was happening on a weekly or a monthly basis. Yeah. Yeah, and it still is happening, but the Northern Irish news media and the Ireland news media are squashed so hard that they're not allowed to report it. So we were there and it was happening. So it's not done. They want to make you believe that Sunday Bloody Sunday, that Easter uprising in 1972 was the last skirmish in Ireland. No, not the case at all. So for Israel and Hamas, the Palestinians, this all changed October 8th of this year with an organized ground assault into Israel. We have 1,000 Hamas operatives that come in with the orders of kill anything that moves, grab a few and bring them back with us. Okay. And the area that they attacked was a music celebration. Okay. Where they knew people weren't going to be armed on a religious holiday because they knew that just like us, if you have a place that serves alcohol, you can't bring firearms. Okay. And so all of those people that were in that music celebration, they had no firearms with them. They were in their cars, but they couldn't bring them into the grounds. And that's why that was easy picking for Hamas when they came in there.
If you see the pictures, that's why all the trunks were popped on all those cars that were parked at the festival.
Yeah, because Hamas knew that's where the weapons would be. And so they got a nice weapons cache as well. Yep. So back to my original screen. How did this happen? Well, it's a difficult question because we have to look at timeline. Let's start 750 years earlier. So 758 BC, the area was made up of many different kingdoms, including Israel and Judah. Now, the two powerhouses in the area was Assyria to the north, where we've got Nineveh, and Egypt to the south. And that's the blue area. But now they had different plans for what to do with this land. By 722 BC, Israel, Damascus, Ammon, and Moab all fell under the Assyrians' rule. By 671 BC, all of the kingdoms, including Egypt, was under Assyrian rule. So this is the Assyrian Empire. By 612 BC, Babylon started to arise. Assyria could no longer hold its conquests. This is usually how empires fail. They stretch their resources too thin over too much of the world. And this is what happened to Assyria. They got stretched too thin. Babylon just moved in, and Egypt moved in, and they fought over the territories. By 600 BC, the entire Eastern Mediterranean was held by Egypt.
So Memphis was Egypt?
Yeah.
Okay. I just want to make sure that was the right spot.
Yep. So just 7 years later, the map looks quite a bit different. The Neo-Babylonian Empire pushes Egypt back to a familiar diagonal line. Look at the line between the blue and the green. That's our line that we have today with Israel. Okay. So that's the Egyptian Wadi. Okay. So it's enough of a depression in the earth that everybody knows it's there. Okay. So the Jewish people that still remained in Jerusalem rebelled against Babylonian rule, and most of the young and influential was taken captive back to Babylon, where King Nebuchadnezzar tried to indoctrinate them. So who in particular are we talking about here? Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. They were taken from Jerusalem to Babylon, because the way the Babylons invaded, they knew history, and they know that empires that conquer by war don't survive. And so what they did is they captured the young and the influential, and they took them back and put them to school to teach them just how great the Babylonian ways are. And you should go back home and tell everybody that Babylonians are wonderful. So that's the idea here. Nebuchadnezzar tried to indoctrinate them, but we know that that was met with resistance as well. And we can read about that in scripture. In 539 BC, the Persians to the north of the Babylonian Empire push into Babylonian territory, and by 536 BC, control all of the lands that were formerly held by Babylon, including Jerusalem. Persian would be Iran, Iraq, Syria, Jordan.
In Babylon.
Yeah. The Persian king Artaxerxes allowed the Jewish people led by a prophet named Nehemiah to return to Jerusalem and rebuild the temple. By 350 BC, the whole city of Jerusalem is rebuilt, inhabited by Jews. Solomon's temple was reestablished. The Torah, which is the Jewish Old Testament, was written. Jewish culture had been established, and they were again a nation in their own right. Okay. 334 BC, Alexander the Great. Y'all have heard of him. He was a Macedonian conqueror, northern Greece. Okay, that's Macedonia. He began a 10-year campaign that completely destroyed the Persian Empire. So if you've seen the 300, the Spartans against King Xerxes, all that was part of this campaign. And he spread Hellenism through the Middle East. Hellenism is basically the Gentile way, the Greek way, Greco-Roman culture, education, the Roman way of doing things. Helen of Troy, yeah. Alexander died exhausted in 323 BC. He was only 32 years old, but he had nothing left. He gave his all, okay? And he died of just exhaustion, just completely worn out. By 312, the Macedonian Empire, once held by the sheer will of Alexander, was split up between his four top generals. Cassander controlled Greece, Lysimachus controlled most of modern-day Turkey, Seleucus controlled the Far East, and Ptolemy had the south, including Israel and Egypt. So the stories of Cleopatra and Mark Antony come out of the Ptolemaic reign. Okay, so real people. How did Mark Antony, a Roman, end up in Egypt? And Cleopatra was also Roman. Don't let anybody fool you. She was not Egyptian. But all of that was Ptolemy's in the Egyptian area. But notice what area they control. What's in purple here? You got the Israel areas in there. Okay? So keep that in mind. War breaks out between the Seleucid dynasty and the Ptolemies, and this resulted in the loss of Jerusalem to the Seleucids, where the Ptolemies pretty much let the Jews live and worship as they pleased. The Seleucids forced more and more of the Greek and Roman ways on the Israelites. An anti-Roman group called the Hasmoneans rose up in Jerusalem, forcing the Seleucids out of the area and reestablish Jewish rule in the area. And Hasmoneans' most famous ruler put in charge of the area, Herod the Great. He was Hasmonean, okay? He was a descendant of the Hasmoneans. The Hasmoneans were Ptolemaic, which means they were under the rule of Rome. And so that's why Rome established a Roman garrison there in Jerusalem. And they had Roman soldiers encamped there and enforcing taxation and Roman rule and all of that. So you can see where in time frame we are. This time shot of the video that I took is 167 BC. It stayed this way for almost 200 years, which would take us to the time of Christ. Okay. By 63 BC, the Roman Empire had taken over the entire area, including most of the Mediterranean countries, which leads us to the time of Christ. By 132 AD, Jerusalem is destroyed. Its people are scattered throughout the world, and Israel is no more. In the 500s, Islam spreads from the Saudi Peninsula throughout the Middle East, controls Jerusalem. This ends the Roman Empire. The most sacred of Islamic mosques, the Dome of the Rock, was built upon the ruins of Solomon's Temple, where the only original structure that remains was and is now the Western Wall, which is what's called the Wailing Wall. So whenever they send pictures on the news of Israel, and you see all of those Jewish rabbis in black with the curls, and they're all doing this in front of the wall, they're praying. Regular Jewish people will take prayers, write them on notes, and stick them in the cracks of the wall, okay? Because that's the only thing that remains of the Temple of Solomon, the Wailing Wall.
How long ago was the Temple of Solomon built, and there's still something that remains?
Right. Oh, and there's more than that.
No, but that's just amazing.
Yeah, there's catacombs that they're exploring now underneath the Dome of the Rock. Yeah, what they call it's actually the third diaspora. So diaspora is a fancy word for the scattering, but it's because of this that most of the Jews moved to Spain. Most of them go to Spain and France, some into Great Britain. And that's where we get a lot of the Jewish influences in Europe, is from this move here. Yeah. Yeah. By the turn of the 11th century, the Turkish Arabs had moved into the Mediterranean era. These Turkish Arabs now we're catching up with my first half. This is the Ottoman Empire. Okay. So these Arabs did not tolerate Christians or Jews. Kill all Christians, kill all Jews. So King Richard starts putting together groups of soldiers that then have military campaigns to push the Arabs out of the Holy Lands. And that's the Crusades. Do y'all see how this is all fitting together? This is stuff that we hear in our history and we don't put it together. We don't put it all together. And all of this stuff is caused by the fight between Arabs and Jews. I did the same thing. Okay, all the movies that I saw, now it puts this in a timeline that makes sense to me. So at the same time, Western Europe is now pushing out the Jews, fearing that they were practicing witchcraft.
Oh, well, because
their dietary restrictions protected them from all of the plagues that were hitting the rest of Europe because they were so overpopulated in such squalor, not knowing any kind of hygiene. Nobody washed their hands. Nobody washed their food. Pour your waste out on the streets for everybody else to walk through, and then you tread it through the house. Okay, so the Jews, because of their laws and the way that God laid out the plan to them, they weren't getting sick like everybody else. And the others actually said, hey, they're not getting sick. I bet they're poisoning our wells. And that's why they started hunting down Jews and calling them witches because of their candlelight ceremonies before meals. And witch hunts occurred in Europe. It wasn't Salem, Massachusetts that started the witch hunts. They had already been going on for hundreds of years in Europe, with the Jewish people being the target. Okay? As the Crusaders made their way to Jerusalem, they killed as many Jews as possible because they were, quote, responsible for the death of Jesus. Because the Jews themselves at Jesus's trial said, may his death be on us and our children. So they used that as the reason. And that's why Hitler pushed against the Jews. He picked up the battle cry from the Crusades.
Okay.
Taking back the Holy Lands. So the original purpose was to push out the Arabs. Yeah, because Jesus apparently they forgot was a Jew.
I was gonna say, that's.
So they started wiping out Jews because they killed Jesus.
But did King Richard? Oh,
He wasn't the only one that had campaigns. Many kings in France and England put together crusades. The Three Musketeers, actually, that was part of those crusades as
Well,
well.
what I was asking is, did the killing of the Jews come from the top, or just the people on the ground said, hey, they started to kill Jesus?
Now you got to remember who's actually in control of these kingdoms in Europe now. The Holy Roman Empire. The Catholics are in charge. And it's the Pope that puts the kings on thrones. So the Pope is saying, if you're not Catholic, you must die.
Oh, so it didn't matter what you were.
Right. You convert or die.
Either you're Arab or Jew or whatever, you should have died.
Right. Exactly. Yep. So by the turn of the 20th century, the Turkish Arabs that were being fought against in the Crusades are now called the Ottoman Empire, and they're still in control of the region around Jerusalem. Now, based on all of this information in the second part of my presentation, this land belonged to how many different people? So many. And the region was all part of an empire. It wasn't individual countries or individual states. It was just part of the empire. And the lands kept on being swapped back and forth as part of that empire. Now remember, there hasn't been a Jewish country since
500?
no, since 173 AD.
Oh, 170.
It was actually.
Okay. And that was the last time it was a country. Yeah. So that's when we get to talk about Antiochus Epiphanes and you know, mad Romans that pretty much destroy everything. That is the first fulfilling of prophecy that we're going to hit in Revelation. All of that gets tied together. So there are many different people groups that could claim this whole area as their cultural lands. So we've seen the modern take. We've seen the Middle Ages take. So now let's go back a little more. Remember this picture? This is the beginning of the second take with all of those little countries in there. We've got Judah and Israel as separate countries. All right, so we've got Phoenicia, Israel, Judah. We got Palestine in green over there. We got Edom, Moab, Ammon, and we've got Aram, Damascus. So these are countries that we hear about in the Old Testament, not countries, but kingdoms. Okay. Now, Edomites are the descendants of Esau, Jacob's twin and Isaac's eldest son. Okay, so you remember Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, always put together. Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. Our fathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Well, Jacob's twin brother was Esau. And Esau was rejected from this deal. And so he formed his own kingdom, and that's Edom, the Edomites. Moabites. The Moabites are the descendants of Moab, who's the son of Lot, Abraham's nephew, and Lot's eldest daughter. Now, if you remember that story from Genesis, Sodom and Gomorrah is destroyed. Lot's wife is destroyed because she turns back, turns to a pillar of salt. And so Lot's daughter says, Dad has no sons. We need to continue the line. So let's sleep with our father. And they did. And so the kingdom of Moab is the descendants of the eldest daughter of Lot. And the kingdom of Ammon is the descendants of Ben-Ammi, who is son of Lot and his youngest daughter. Okay. Now notice where these little kingdoms are.
On the
East bank of Jordan. Okay. Because if you remember in Genesis 13, that's when Abraham says, listen, Lot, I like you and everything, but we just can't hang out together anymore. So you pick the area that you want to be in, and I'll take what you don't. And so Lot says, hey, it's really fertile over there in the Jordan Valley, so I'm going to take my crops over there. You can have the rest, uncle. And so Lot goes to the valley and all places east.
Okay.
And Abraham then takes everything west. Okay.
Okay, so there's Moab and then the youngest daughter.
Yeah, Ammon.
Yeah.
Ammon.
Okay.
Yeah, so all of that, they're still east of the Jordan River. And so that's the descendants of Lot. And the descendants of Abraham are to the west there, Israel and Jerusalem. Now, 920 BC. This is the two kingdoms, right? We've got the kingdom of Israel and the kingdom of Judah. So after the death of King Solomon, the 10 northern tribes separated from the 2 southern tribes, creating a divided kingdom, each with different kings. The kings of Judah were the descendants of David. The kings of Israel started with a governor that King Solomon put in place before King Solomon's death. Okay, so this is how we end up with 2 tribes. Now notice to the north, we still have Phoenicia. That's not part of the kingdom of Israel. And we've got this little sliver of coast to the west of Judah. And that's where the Philistines are. Okay. So the Philistines included Goliath, right? This is his area where he's from.
I still don't see it.
It's right here. There. The little
Oh.
tiny.
Well,
There you put it together. That's the Gaza Strip. That's the area where the Philistines were from, and they were such giants and fierce warriors that the kingdom of Judah or Israel, even when they were combined, they couldn't knock them out. They couldn't beat them. No. Genesis 15, verses 18 through 21. On that day, the Lord made a covenant with Abram and said, to your descendants, I give this land, from the Wadi of Egypt. What? The ditch in Egypt, to the great river, the Euphrates, the land of the Kenites, Kenizzites, Cadmonites, Hittites, Perizzites, Rephaites, Amorites, Canaanites, Girgashites, and Jebusites. That's a lot of ites. Okay. Now, if you look here on the map, though, we've got most of them where we knew where they were historically. Okay, we've got Hittites up here and over here. There's the Euphrates. So that's the area that God told Abraham in Genesis. That's your eastern limit. You got Cadmonites, Ammonites, Perizzites, Canaanites, Jebusites, Kenites. And there's another wadi in Egypt. Okay, so it's not just here, which connects the Mediterranean to the Gulf here.
Yeah, that's the Nile River.
Part of the Nile River. So we don't know where the Kenizzites, the Rephaites, and the Girgashites were. Don't know where they were. But based on this, how much land did God give Abram?
Way more than they have.
Way more than they have now. And so according to the Jews,
That's all there.
that's all theirs. Because God gave it to them. Yep. Yep. All right. In Numbers 34, we get some more details. Your southern side will include some of the desert of Zin, what we now call the Sinai Desert, along the border of Edom. Your southern boundary will start in the east from the southern end of the Dead Sea, cross the south of Scorpion Pass, continue on to Zin, and go south of Kadesh Barnea. Then it'll go to Hazar Adar and over to Asman, where it will turn, join the Wadi of Egypt, and end in the Mediterranean Sea. Your western boundary will be the coast of the Mediterranean Sea. This will be your boundary on the west. For your northern boundary, run a line from the Mediterranean Sea to Mount Hor, and from Mount Hor to Lebo Hamath. Then the boundary will go to Zedad, continue to Ziphron, and end at Hazar Enan. This will be your boundary to the north. For your eastern boundary, run a line from Hazar Enan to Shechem. The boundary will go down from Shechem to Riblah on the east side of Ain and continue along the slopes east of the Sea of Galilee. Then the boundary will go down along the Jordan and end at the Dead Sea. This will be your land with its boundaries on every side. So looking at that map, everything in red is the border that was given here in Numbers. Now there we've got an eastern line that's the Jordan River. Okay, so the Israelites are like, well, let's not be greedy. So we'll just take to the Jordan. And they've not tried to claim anything permanently that's further east than the Jordan River. And they've never tried to expand via sea west into the Mediterranean. Never have. Now, there's a couple of reasons for that. Here, though, it's because God says, don't expand to the west. That's going to be your border. Okay? So all they're claiming is what God gave them. They're not trying to conquer every nation of every land. Okay?
They just want their border.
Just want theirs. So, modern history, we call that area Palestine. Ancient history, there's many different countries, nations that have been in that area. Biblical history, this is Israel and all of the Hebrew people, which is why starting in the 60s, Jews moved from all around the world back into the nation. The idea was to overpopulate and push in order to get back to the borders that God gave them.
Yeah.
So there's part that I skipped. So remember when, no. Remember when I said that when the diaspora happened, it moved the Jews up into Europe? The Europeans were at the height of civilization, trade, art, food, everything was wonderful there, and they wanted the money. The Jewish people were the bridge between the wealthy Europeans and the Arabs and Asia. The Arabs would talk to the Jews that were in Europe, and the Europeans would talk to the Jews that were in Europe. So the Jews started brokering all trade. Any trade that happened outside of Europe had to go through the Jews. Because of that, the Jews became the richest people group in the world. And it's all because
I thought you were going to say Jew.
they had a foot in both worlds. Because of that wealth, though, that's why we see them as haberdashers. We see them as fine tailors. We see them as jewelers. And then when the motion picture industry grew,
Yes.
they jumped into producers
Producing.
because that's where the money is.
They had money to begin with.
And they had money to make the money. And it's all because of their trading prowess
Right.
that they had all throughout the Middle Ages. Well, he stole all of their wealth. Hitler. Yeah. But that's why there was so much wealth to steal.
That movie you watched, that they were just, they came and were finding all the paintings and. Yes. That was a good movie.
Yep. Yep. So we get a clue of the end times here also. In Daniel 9:27, the ruler, Antichrist, will make a treaty with the people for a period of one set of 7. So that's 7 years. So in the book of Daniel, it tells us that there will be no peace. There can be no peace. God says so. Until one person will establish such a powerful peace treaty that the Arabs will give up the Dome of the Rock. There will be no peace until the Antichrist brokers this peace treaty, and Arabs and Jews will actually get along.
Right.
Not just tolerate each other, but embrace each other. The Arabs will eventually allow the Jews to rebuild the temple on the original site of Solomon's temple in Jerusalem. Problem is that the Dome of the Rock, the most important mosque in the Muslim world, is currently located there. There's not even a mosque in Mecca that rivals this. So if you want to go to the most holy mosque in the world, it's the Dome of the Rock. In Mecca, they just got this big cube that they march around.
Yeah. We saw lots of mosques in Spain.
Oh, yeah. 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 So it'll have to be torn down, and the Arabs will be okay with it.
Or some wild rocket's gonna hit it from something.
Yeah. So what's the answer?
Yes.
So whose country is it? Well, we being Christians believe in the Bible. What does the Bible say? It's Israel. That's our answer. It's that simple. But the rest of the world and the news, sometimes you watch the news and it's like, hey, it sounds like they're taking the Palestinian side. And then sometimes you listen to it and it's like, okay, that's the Jews, yay. It depends what story. So yeah, very interesting.
Well, NBC has different people reporting over there, and it depends on who you're listening to report what they're saying, and some of them leans very Palestinian, some of it leans very Israel, and so.
According to international law, there is still a Palestinian state and an Israeli or Jewish state, and Israel has pushed into the Palestinian state. Exactly.
Right, but Hamas started it all. And you can't, there's not a country of Hamas, so.
But Hamas started with.
Well, Hamas started as a break off of the PLO. Okay. But the whole unrest really goes all the way back to Abraham being given a promise by God that he was going to bear a child. And Sarah says, well, it's not going to be with me. So Sarah gave Hagar, her handmaiden, to Abram to have a child. Hagar became pregnant, had a son by the name of Ishmael. When Sarah actually did become pregnant, yeah. When Sarah became pregnant and bore Isaac, they had no reason to keep Ishmael along. So they sent him out, and he became the father of the Arab nations, where Isaac became the father of the Jewish nations. The Arabs say Ishmael's firstborn.
But
he deserves all of this land as firstborn son,
That's not what God said.
but that's not what God said. So it's a land battle over
The
firstborn
firstborn.
rights.
Yeah.
Yep. And so that's where it actually started. And it will continue until the Antichrist says no.
Well, I didn't know that the Hamas broke out of the PLO as a terrorist group.
Yeah, so the PLO was a government group trying to do things through legal means.
Right. But does the PLO see them as a terrorist group?
Yes.
Okay.
PLO still pays their martyrdom to the families, right?
Yeah.
Really?
Thousands and thousands of dollars a year.
Yeah.
You create terrorism, they pay you, and your family's taken care of.
Yeah, because Jake was like, well, where's the country of Hamas? And like, there is not one.
There's no
That's
country
what's
of
so bad
Hamas.
with this. They're like,
Now, another group, which is not it's not a Palestinian group, it's actually a Lebanese group that's called Hezbollah. It's again another terrorist group, though. There's no country of Hezbollah, but they are another group that's to the north of Israel. And that'll be in the Golan Heights and Lebanon and Syria.
So are they?
And Hezbollah, they're having problems there too. Israel has got all of their soldiers and tanks on the northern border as well. So they're going to be pressing into that area.
I even heard on the news that people who are raised in the US that are Israeli, they went to Israel and they came back to the US. Now they're going back over there to fight.
Oh, yeah.
So, I mean, they were trained, and there was a lot that went over there.
Yeah, they interviewed 5
Five
soldiers
brothers.
and
They're all fighting.
yeah,
right now.
2 of them stayed in Israel and 3 of them were actually raised here in the US.
Right,
And they get together every war.
yeah.
To fight.
Wow.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Um,
So I hope that cleared up some of the things, right? It's still whose viewpoint you're going to take. So when you watch the news, it depends who's giving the story.
Right.
That is going to be the good guy and the bad guy. Nobody thinks Hamas is good except Hamas. Okay. But the problem is Hamas uses people as shield. So the whole idea is to force the people of Gaza to push Hamas out so that the Israelites will leave us alone. That's the goal. But the problem is that Hamas so infiltrated the Gaza Strip that they are the government.
Right.
So there's no Gaza government that will say, okay, guys, you got to leave. Because Israel says that Gaza, the West Bank, and the Golan Heights still belong to them. So there is no government that's set up there. It's Israeli territory, but not controlled.
All I know is they're not, it's not really Bible says there's a new property line, but it's not really their.
By treaty. Yeah. And so the reason Israel tells them go make communes over there is so that you can outpopulate the Palestinians that are there. And by the way, you can have that land for free. Belongs to us anyway. So you can have that land for free. Go settle it, grow it up. You're good. But they also give them protection. So if anybody rises up against them, they send a little force from Israel. Yeah. Yep, that's that kibbutz that's going on over there. It's a lot of stuff. I hope that helped clear some things up though for you. Are there any other questions? It's recorded. Yes. Yep.
Awesome.
So that's all I've got.
wow, Monday's gonna be good, Gary.
You
We're
mentioned
gonna-
Canaanites last Monday, but you didn't even say Canaanites.
Yeah, they're part of the ites.
Yeah.
You said, you told me it goes back to Cain and Abel times.
Yeah, the Canaanites are descendants of Cain.
Yeah. I have.
Well, the problem with our history is we're taught, it's never pulled religion into the history. It's always just a government kind of a situation that America, that the United States.
No, but you can tell what newscasters are believers or not with the way they put their slant on their words on that when they're talking. So. But, yeah, it was interesting, because I told Steve, I said, I was making supper the other night, I went, what did you just say on TV? That makes it sound like, yes, I'm so glad that somebody killed this 6-year-old Palestinian boy because they lived in the same house. You do that in New York or Chicago, an old man, he was 70, 80 years old, killed a 6-year-old boy because he was Palestinian.
No, because he was Muslim.
Well, he said, but the guy said he killed him because he didn't want him to grow up and be a Palestinian Hamas soldier. So,
It was something really, yeah.
it was stupid.
Their landlord.
It was his landlord. So,